Every captain who has ever taken the wheel of a night ship learns one law before any other. Never fly while you are dying inside. But the king breaks that law tonight. Both the king and his first mate collapse above the clouds, far past the reach of any harbor. The helm chamber is sealed from within. 280 passengers are trapped in the dark belly of the ship with no one at the wheel. She is only a cabin attendant. That is what everyone believes. But she is the only soul aboard who can bring the Duskwing down safely, and before this night ends, she will have to prove it. Before the story continues, think for a moment about where you are watching from tonight, and stay close, because there is much more still to come. Every pilot who has ever crossed the northern sky by night learns the same sacred rule during training. Never take the helm while sick, never fly wounded, never continue when the body can no longer be trusted. The rule exists for one reason alone. Lives depend upon it. Alaric Voss knows this rule. He has known it for over 2 centuries, though to any mortal eye he appears a man of perhaps 45 years, silver-haired, pale as moonlit stone, with the bearing of someone who has never once been told no. Tonight, aboard his own flagship airship, high above the Blackwack water between Wintermere Harbor and the hidden Dominion across the sea, he is about to break the only rule he has never broken before. And the cabin attendant he dismissed at the gangway not 1 hour earlier, the woman he told, without even looking at her twice, to never set foot near his helm chamber. She is not merely cabin crew. She is Elena Marsh, once a Sky Knight of the Duskwarden Order, veteran of the long border campaigns against the creatures that hunt in darkness, holder of a pilot's mark that has never been revoked. Within 2 hours, she will do something Alaric Voss swore aloud could never happen. She will break through his sealed door. She will take his seat at the helm, and she will bring every last passenger home alive, including the proud king who tried to shut her out. It is early evening on a Tuesday in the town of Wintermere Harbor, a fog-wrapped port city on the northeastern coast, where the docks smell of salt and lamp oil, and the great iron mooring towers rise over the rooftops like the ribs of some sleeping giant. The airship terminal sits at the edge of the harbor, gaslights glowing gold against the coming dark. The Duskwing rests at her mooring, immense and gleaming, black hull polished until it mirrors the last color draining from the sky. Passengers file up the boarding ramp in a slow, murmuring stream. 280 travelers bound for the far Dominion across the northern sea. Merchants and diplomats and pilgrims, and a few curious wanderers who simply wanted to see the famous ship for themselves. The upper cabins fill first, then the middle decks, then the lower berths near the stern. Deckhands haul the last crates of cargo up through the belly hatch, while the auxiliary engines begin their low, steady hum, and lantern boys walk the length of the mooring tower, lighting the last of the evening lamps. A young family settles into the middle cabin, the father fumbling with travel papers while his small daughter presses her nose to the window, watching the harbor lights scatter below like fallen stars. 2 merchants argue quietly over a ledger in the row behind them, and an elderly woman traveling alone knits steadily, needles clicking, as though she has crossed this same sky 100 times before and sees no reason to be impressed by it now. Alaric Voss arrives at the terminal at 1/4 the hour, and every soul in the boarding hall seems to feel him before they see him. He is tall, straight-backed, dressed in a long coat the color of a moonless sky, silver hair combed back from a face pale as bone china. His eyes are the deep violet of a bruised evening, and they miss nothing. A heavy signet ring rests on his left hand, carved with the crest of a house older than the harbor town itself. He has captained the Duskwing for longer than anyone aboard has been alive, save perhaps himself. He built his reputation ship by ship, route by route, across 2 centuries of flight. Not once has he lost a passenger. Not once has he failed to bring his vessel home. He is proud of this record. It is not simply an achievement to him. It is the entire architecture of who he is, the one certainty he has allowed himself to build a whole existence around. Alaric believes in order. He believes the helm chamber belongs to the one who commands it, and to no one else. The cabin is for the passengers and the stewards who tend them. The helm is his alone, sealed, sacred, untouchable. This is not arrogance in his own mind. This is simply how a ship survives the long, dark crossing. Clear lines, clear command. No exceptions, no matter who might ask for one. He reaches the boarding ramp at 20 past the hour. A young woman in a steward's uniform stands there greeting travelers as they pass. Dark hair pinned back in a tight knot, posture perfect. A calm and practiced smile on her face. Elena Marsh, 35 years old, 5 years into her service aboard the Duskwing, 3 silver pins on her collar marking 8 years with the harbor line altogether. "Good evening, Captain Voss," she says, her voice steady and polite. Alaric barely turns his head. A single nod, nothing more, and he continues past her toward the helm chamber without breaking stride. Stewards are stewards. Pilots are pilots. Different worlds, and in his mind they were never meant to touch, not even for the length of a passing hallway. Alina watches him pass. She does not take offense. She has served under captains like this for years, the kind who never learn the names of their own crew, who treat the cabin as though it barely exists until something goes wrong within it. Some captains treat their whole ship as one crew, bound together by the same fate for the length of the crossing. Alaric Voss is plainly not one of them. She made her peace with that a long time ago. It costs too much energy to mind it, and she has learned to save her energy for things that matter more. But she notices something as he passes, small details most travelers would miss entirely. His left shoulder sits lower than his right, as though some old wound never healed correctly. His violet eyes are ringed with a tiredness far deeper than a single sleepless night could explain. His pale skin, always fair, carries a faint gray undertone tonight, like frost settling early over stone before the first true freeze of the season. She files the observation away without comment, perhaps only the long wait of centuries catching up to him at last. Perhaps nothing at all. Alaric steps into the helm chamber a few minutes later. His first mate, Mira Bellwether, is already seated at the secondary controls. A bright, eager young woman of 29, dark-eyed and quick, 4 years in the harbor line, and tonight, her very first crossing of the deep northern route. She looks up as he enters. "Good evening, Captain," she says, genuine respect warming her voice. Alaric answers with little more than a grunt and settles into the great carved chair at the center of the chamber, his throne of brass instruments and glowing dials. Worn smooth by 200 years of his own hands, the helm chamber door stands open during boarding, as harbor law requires, transparency before the long dark crossing. Alaric hates this more than he will ever say aloud. Passengers drift past in the corridor, peering in, pointing, a child once pressing her small face right up to the frame while her mother apologized and pulled her gently away. After the old wars against the night things, every airship line reinforced its helm doors with cold iron and ward glass, sealed tight enough to withstand axes, fire, even a modest working of dark magic. The rule is absolute in his mind. Keep the helm sealed. Let no one unauthorized inside, ever, under any circumstance he can imagine. At 1:30, Elena appears at the threshold of the helm chamber to deliver the standard passenger briefing, required before every crossing without exception. She does not step over the line. She simply stands politely at the doorway. "Captain Voss," she says, "I need to go over the cabin report with you before we cast off." "Make it quick," he says, his tone cold enough to frost the air between them. She does not flinch. She has weathered worse. 280 passengers aboard tonight, full manifest, 6 stewards including myself, the healing kits checked and stocked, the emergency wards tested and glowing steady, all passengers seated and accounted for. She pauses, then continues. One passenger in the middle cabin carries a severe silver affliction, life-threatening if exposed. We will make certain no silverwork trays or utensils reach her section tonight. Also, there is a healer aboard, Dr. Adrian Cole, seated in the upper cabin. Already identified himself to the crew should he be needed. Alaric barely listens, running through his own instrument checks in his mind. This is not his concern. That is her domain, not his. "Fine," he says. "Anything else?" She hesitates only a moment. "Also, Captain, I wanted to confirm the helm access protocol for this crossing. In case of an emergency, the harbor code allows cabin crew to request entry if..." He cuts her off before she finishes. "The helm door stays sealed for the entire crossing. Always. No exceptions of any kind. No steward enters this chamber unless I personally command it, and I will not. Is that understood?" His violet eyes hold hers, cold and immovable. She pauses, choosing her words with care. "Understood, Captain. But should there truly be an emergency?" "No exceptions means no exceptions," he says. Louder now. "The helm is mine. The cabin is yours. Those lines do not blur, not on my ship, not ever, no matter what happens between now and dawn." He turns back to his instruments, the conversation closed. Elena nods once, retreats to the corridor, her face composed and unreadable. But her mind is already working, cataloging, weighing what she has just seen and heard, the way she was trained to weigh every detail long before she ever wore a steward's with uniform. The boarding ramp folds away at 1:15. Ground crews release the mooring lines, and the Duskwing lifts free of her tower, with a low groan of iron and enchanted timber. The engines catch the ether currents, and the great ship rises over Wintermere Harbor, the gaslights of the town shrinking below into a scatter of golden dust. The mooring towers themselves soon lost beneath a thin, drifting bank of evening fog. Alaric guides her out over open water, steady and sure, every motion practiced across 2 centuries of flight, and for a moment, watching the harbor vanish behind them, he allows himself the smallest measure of peace. Down in the lower berths, a young sailor bound home to his family, for the first time in a year, presses his forehead to the cold window glass, watching the last lights of the coast disappear. In the galley, Tomas Reyes counts the wine flasks and spiced water jugs with practiced hands, calling out totals to another steward who checks them against the manifest. Elena moves quietly among the rows one final time, before settling the cabin for the long crossing ahead, tucking a stray blanket here, writing an unlatched window shade there, her steps unhurried but her eyes, as always, missing very little of what passes around her. 2 hours into the crossing, the Duskwing cuts smoothly through the high currents above the clouds, her lanterns glowing amber against the endless dark. Below, the northern sea stretches out unseen, a black mirror under a moonless sky. The ship has passed the point of no return now, too far from Wintermere Harbor to turn back, too far still from the far shore to hope for any quick rescue should something go wrong along the way. Elena moves through the cabins with the easy rhythm of long habit, refilling cups of spiced wine, tucking blankets around sleepy children, answering the same nervous questions travelers always ask on their first deep crossing. Is it always this smooth? Will we truly land before sunrise? Has the captain ever lost a ship? She answers every question with the same calm patience, though her mind keeps drifting back to the helm chamber, to the gray cast she noticed in Alaric's face at the boarding ramp, and to the strange, tired heaviness behind his eyes that no amount of pride could fully hide from someone trained to look for exactly that. She pauses beside the young family in the middle cabin, kneeling to speak softly with the small daughter still pressed against the window. There's nothing out there but stars and clouds, the girl says, half disappointed. Elena smiles. Sometimes that's the best kind of nothing to look at, she tells her, and the girl seems to accept this as a perfectly reasonable answer before turning back to the glass, satisfied, humming quietly to herself. In the upper cabin, Dr. Adrian Cole reads quietly by lamplight, a gray-haired man with kind, tired eyes and the unhurried manner of someone who has spent decades sitting beside the frightened and the dying. Elena pauses near his seat. "Thank you again for identifying yourself earlier," she says softly. "I hope your skills won't be needed tonight." He smiles. "So do I, but I'm glad to be found quickly if they are." Long crossings have a way of surprising people, he adds, almost to himself, and she finds herself agreeing more than she lets show on her face. She continues on to the middle cabin, where the young woman with the silver affliction sits wrapped in a woolen shawl, nervous but reassured. "No silver work anywhere near your section tonight," Elena promises again. The woman relaxes visibly, murmurs her thanks, and turns back to the window, where nothing but darkness rolls past outside the glass, broken only by the faint glow of the ship's own running lanterns reflected in the pane. Elena drifts back toward the corridor outside the helm chamber, drawn there without quite meaning to be. She lingers a moment longer than duty requires, remembering, unbidden, the years she spent flying along the storm border before grief and duty pulled her home again. She was 19 when she first earned her wings, trained by an order that asked everything of her and gave her, in return, the one thing she had never found anywhere else, a sense that her hands were built for exactly this kind of work. Her mentor had been the one to see it in her first, an old sky knight named Corwin Ash, who took her under his wing when she was little more than a frightened recruit, terrified of heights she had never before been asked to master. He taught her to read the wind before she could read a full instrument panel, to trust her hands before she trusted the dials in front of her. He used to say that a good pilot listens to the ship the way a good friend listens to another person, patiently, without assuming they already know what the other is about to say. When illness finally took him, slow and merciless across one long winter, she sat at his bedside every night she could manage, holding his hand through the worst of it, listening to him talk about skies she had not yet flown and storms he had long since stopped fearing. When he passed, some part of her decided the border could carry on without her, because her mother needed her closer to home, and grief had left little room in her for anything else that season. She built a quieter life after that, first flying small coastal skiffs for a modest wage, then setting even that aside when the hours proved too unpredictable for a woman trying to care for an aging mother on her own. The harbor line offered steady pay, a fixed schedule, and a uniform that asked nothing of her past at all. She took it gladly, and told herself the sky would still be there whenever she found her way back to it, even if that day never actually came, even if she spent the rest of her working years simply pouring wine and folding blankets for travelers who never once wondered what she had done before. She thinks of Corwin now, standing outside the sealed helm chamber, and wonders what he would have made of the king's absolute refusal to let anyone else near his controls. He always said pride was the fastest way to lose a ship, faster even than weather, faster than any creature that hunted the border skies. Rules exist to be trusted, he used to tell her, but pride convinces a person that they alone are the exception to every rule ever written. And that conviction has ended more crossings badly than any storm she ever flew through. She shakes the thought away and returns to her duties, refilling cups, checking fastenings, exchanging quiet words with Tomas in the forward galley, as the ship hums steadily onward through the dark. Neither of them can yet know how soon Corwin's old warning is about to prove itself true. High above a black and merciless sea, behind a door that has never once opened without the king's own hand to command it, Alaric Voss sits at the helm long after Mira has settled into the quiet rhythm of the crossing, his violet eyes fixed on instruments he has read 1,000 times over across 2 centuries of flight. He does not need to watch them so closely tonight, he knows that. But watching them gives his hands something to do besides notice the tightness gathering slowly in his chest, a tightness he has felt building for months now and refused, every single time, to name for what it truly is. He was crowned nearly 2 centuries ago, in a court that no longer exists in any form a mortal historian would recognize, the last surviving heir of a line that had ruled its hidden dominion, since long before Windermere Harbor was ever more than a scattering of fishing huts along a cold shore. He remembers the weight of that crown settling onto his head, remembers the old ministers who told him, in careful, formal language, that a king of his bloodline could never afford to appear weak before his own court. Not even once, not even for a single hour. He believed them completely, because believing them was easier than questioning them, and because grief had already taught him, long before that crowning day, exactly how quickly a court could turn on anyone who showed the smallest crack in their armor. His own father had shown weakness once, near the end, some small failing of nerve during a difficult season of famine and unrest, and the whispers that followed haunted the halls of the old castle for a full generation afterward, long after the failing itself had been forgotten. Alaric swore quietly and absolutely that no one would ever whisper such things about him. So for 2 centuries, he built himself into something that never faltered, never rested longer than necessity demanded, never allowed his court or his crew to see so much as a flicker of doubt cross his face. He fed only when duty made it unavoidable, and even then, sparingly, convinced that restraint itself was a kind of strength, a discipline no other king before him had managed to master so completely. He did not understand, or refused to understand, that his own body was quietly keeping a different kind of ledger the entire time, one that did not care in the slightest what image he meant to project to the world around him. The tightness in his chest first appeared some months ago, faint enough to dismiss as nothing more than the ordinary weight of centuries settling deeper into old bones. He ignored it. Then came the breathlessness after climbing even a short flight of stairs, which he blamed on the damp harbor air. Then came the fatigue that never truly lifted no matter how long he rested, which he simply refused to examine too closely at all, because examining it meant admitting there might be something to find, and admitting that felt, to him, like the beginning of the very end his ministers had always warned him to guard against. He never once sent word to his own court healers. He never once confided in Mira, who has served faithfully at his side for 4 years, and would have kept his confidence completely, without a single word carried beyond the helm chamber. He certainly never considered confiding in a steward he barely allows himself to look at twice, though something about the calm, unhurried way Elena Marsh carries herself through the cabin has nagged quietly at the back of his mind more than once tonight, an unplaceable sense that she sees more than she lets on, more than any steward has any business seeing. He remembers, briefly and without wanting to, a winter council many decades past when a distant cousin of his, a minor lord from a smaller holding, collapsed during a formal address before half the court and never fully recovered his standing afterward, spending his remaining years quietly pitied rather than respected. Alaric had watched that unfold from a young king's careful distance and told himself then that whatever weakness had claimed his cousin would never claim him, that he would simply refuse it the way one refuses a bad trade or an unwise alliance. The ship shudders faintly as it crosses a thin band of turbulence. Nothing serious, the ordinary give and take of high currents meeting colder air below. Mira corrects for it smoothly at her console, and Alaric watches her do it with something almost like pride, the quiet satisfaction of a captain who trained his first mate well. But the small jolt sends a fresh lance of discomfort through his chest, sharper this time than the vague tightness he has grown almost accustomed to, and for just a moment his hand tightens hard enough against the armrest that his knuckles show pale beneath skin already pale as moonlight. He breathes through it, slow and deliberate, the way he has taught himself to breathe through every discomfort for months now. And the moment passes, leaving only a lingering unease he refuses to name aloud even inside his own mind. He tells himself, as he has told himself every single time before, that it is nothing, that 2 centuries of unbroken command cannot possibly be undone by something so small, so easily willed away by sheer determination alone, by the same stubborn will that has carried him through every other trial his long life has thrown at him. He does not know, cannot yet know, that determination has never once been enough to hold back a failing heart, and that somewhere in the very near future, high above this same black and merciless sea, his own refusal to admit even a moment of weakness is about to place every single soul aboard his ship, including his own, directly into the hands of the one person he told, without a second thought, to never come near his door. The first true warning comes just past the 2-hour mark, when Mira Bellwether feels a strange lightness spreading suddenly through her limbs, the brass instruments blurring for a single heartbeat before her eyes. She blinks hard, shakes her head, and the blur clears. "You well?" Alaric asks without turning. "Yes," she says. "Just dizzy for a moment." "Fine now," he nods absently. "Perhaps the altitude. Drink some water." She reaches for her flask and swallows a long draught, feeling only slightly better than before, and returns her attention to the dials in front of her. 5 minutes later it returns, far stronger this time. The chamber seems to tilt around her. Nausea rises fast and sharp in her throat. She grips the edge of her console, tries to steady herself, fails entirely. "Captain," she says weakly. Alaric looks over, truly looks this time, and sees her face has gone pale and damp with sweat, her hands trembling against the brass dials in a way that has nothing to do with simple fatigue. This is not ordinary altitude sickness, and some old instinct in him recognizes that immediately, even through the fog gathering slowly behind his own eyes. "What's wrong?" he asks, sharper now concern breaking through his usual iron calm. "I don't know," she admits, swallowing hard. "I feel truly ill, dizzy, sick to my stomach." Alaric's mind turns quickly through the problem, running old calculations from 100 long crossings before this one. They are far above the open sea, hours from any harbor in either direction. If Mira cannot continue, he loses his second at the helm, leaving him to fly alone the rest of the crossing. Not ideal, but not impossible either. He has flown longer stretches alone before, long ago in his younger centuries, when his body still answered every demand without complaint or hesitation. "Can you continue?" he asks. She nods weakly. "I think so. I just need the washroom a moment, splash some water on my face." She unfastens her harness with shaking hands and rises unsteadily, using the console for balance, and stumbles toward the small washroom built into the rear corner of the helm chamber. The door closes behind her, and Alaric turns back to his instruments, telling himself this is simply an ordinary inconvenience, the kind any long crossing eventually produces sooner or later. Out in the cabin, Elena passes the middle rows once more, and the young woman with the silver affliction catches her sleeve gently. "Is something wrong up front?" she asks, her voice low. "I felt the ship shift a moment ago, just slightly." Elena keeps her face calm and reassures her that pilots make small adjustments constantly, that a shifting current means nothing more than ordinary weather far below them. But even as she says it, some old instinct along her spine has already begun to prickle. The same quiet warning she used to feel moments before a border patrol turned into something far worse than routine. She continues her rounds regardless, unwilling to alarm 280 passengers over a feeling she cannot yet name or explain to herself, let alone to anyone else aboard. Tomas notices her expression as she passes the galley and asks if all is well. She only shrugs, tells him it is probably nothing, and continues on toward the corridor outside the helm chamber, drawn there again by whatever quiet unease has settled over her since the ship first shuddered through that brief patch of turbulence. Everything reads steady, altitude holding, heading true, engines humming within their proper range. The ship, at least, is behaving exactly as it should, indifferent to whatever quiet crisis is beginning to unfold within the small sealed chamber that carries it through the dark. But then he feels it himself. a sudden, vicious pain lancing through his chest on the left side, deep and sharp as a blade slipped between the ribs. He gasps aloud, grips the arms of his chair until his knuckles whiten completely. The pain spreads down his left arm, up into his jaw, tightening around his throat like a cold hand closing slowly and without mercy. His vision swims at the edges. A cold sweat breaks across his pale forehead despite the chill already natural to his skin. A wrongness even his own centuries-old body seems to recognize as something far beyond its usual limits. No, he thinks. Not this. Not now. Not here. He has felt these warnings creeping for months now. The tightness in his chest, the breathlessness after climbing even a short stair, the deep fatigue that never truly lifts no matter how he rests. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself a creature as old and as powerful as he could not possibly be failing from within. That pride alone might somehow hold back what his body had clearly been trying to warn him of for a very long time now. So he ignored every warning sign, refused even to whisper his suffering to Mira or any other soul aboard his ship. Admitting weakness, to his mind, meant admitting he was no longer the king his crown demanded he be, and that fear had always run deeper in him than any fear of the pain itself. And now, at the worst possible hour, in the worst possible place, high above a black and merciless sea, his own body is beginning to fail him at last, and 280 lives hang entirely from the outcome of the next few minutes. Another wave of pain crashes through him, worse than the last, crushing, absolute. He cannot draw a full breath. His left arm has gone entirely numb. He tries to reach the speaking tube, to call for aid, to declare the emergency his own rules should have made easy to announce. But his fingers will not obey him. His arm is too weak to lift. Everything in him is failing at once, and there is nothing left in him to stop it from happening, no matter how fiercely his will still fights against it. In the washroom, Mira retches violently again and again, her stomach emptying completely, though the sickness only deepens with every passing minute. The small chamber spins around her. She tries to stand, her legs buckle beneath her, and she slides down the wall to the floor, unable to rise, barely able to breathe at all. She does not understand it. She felt perfectly well only an hour ago. Later it will be discovered that the wine flask kept in the helm chamber carried a spoiled batch, tainted somewhere along its journey from cellar to ship, a common enough mishap that is simply struck at the cruelest possible hour imaginable. Out in the corridor, Elena hears it, sounds bleeding faintly through the sealed door, wrong sounds, groaning, labored breath, something heavy shifting against the floor within. She moves quickly to the door, presses her ear against the cold iron, and hears enough to know with absolute certainty that something has gone terribly wrong inside that chamber. Every old instinct trained into her along the storm border rises at once, sharp and unmistakable, the same feeling she used to get in the seconds before an ambush revealed itself along a quiet stretch of sky. She lifts the speaking tube and calls again. No answer. She calls a second time. A third. On the fourth attempt, a voice finally answers, but it is barely recognizable as Alaric's, weak, gasping, hardly coherent at all. "Captain Voss," she says urgently, "is everything well? I can hear you in distress. Let me help. Open the door." He tries to speak, tries to insist he is fine, tries to hold on to the last threads of the command that has defined his entire existence for 2 long centuries. But no words will come, only ragged, failing breath scraping against his throat. "Captain," she says again, more urgent now, "I need you to open this door immediately. This is an emergency." He manages one word, barely a whisper. "No." Then silence. He has lost consciousness at the helm, slumped forward against the great carved chair that has carried him faithfully through 200 years of unbroken command, now utterly unable to answer even the smallest call for help. And the door remains sealed, warded, impossible to force from without. No one can reach him, no one can help him. And somewhere just beyond that same door, his first mate lies collapsed on the washroom floor, equally unable to fly. Both pilots down. No one at the helm of the Duskwing but the steady, unthinking engines, holding course through habit alone, high above a black and endless sea, carrying 280 souls who have no idea their lives now depend entirely on whatever happens in the next few minutes. Elena stands frozen for only the length of a single breath, the old training rising up through her before conscious thought can even catch up to it. Every year she spent along the storm border narrows, now into this one corridor, this one sealed door, this one impossible choice between the rule she was told to obey and the plain, undeniable truth of what she has just heard through cold iron. Corwin's voice returns to her unbidden, steady as it always was, reminding her that rules exist to serve the people inside them, never the other way around. Elena does not waste a single breath on panic. She runs to the small steward station near the forward galley and pulls free the emergency codex. Flipping quickly to the page, every harbor line requires every steward to memorize and pray never to need. Helm access protocol. Emergency incapacitation. If both pilots are rendered unable to fly, cabin crew may request emergency entry directly from the harbor authority, provided proper cause is shown, and proper cause has never been clearer than it is at this exact moment. She lifts the great speaking crystal mounted beside the codex, a smooth globe of dark glass that hums faintly when touched, linked by old wardcraft directly to the harbor authority back in Wintermere. She presses her palm against it and speaks clearly. This is Elena Marsh, senior steward aboard the Duskwing. We have this emergency. Both pilots are incapacitated. I require immediate helm access. Send the override at once. The crystal flickers and a voice answers, calm official. Harbor operations. Repeat your message, please. She repeats it, word for word, forcing her voice to stay level even as her pulse hammers beneath it. Both pilots down. Medical emergency. I need entry to the helm chamber immediately. The crystal dims, then brightens again. A different voice now, older, weightier, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions quickly and without hesitation. This is Chancellor Edmund Ashcombe, senior steward of the Harbor Authority. Identify yourself fully. Elena Marsh, she says. Senior steward, the Duskwing. Ashcombe continues. Explain your situation in full. She does, quickly and without wasted words. Both the captain and his first mate are down. Some manner of collapse, both unresponsive to the speaking tube. No one currently holds the helm, and the ship continues onward on engines alone. Then comes the question that will change everything. Who among your crew can fly this ship? Elena does not hesitate, not even for the length of a single breath. I can. Ashcombe's voice sharpens further, not unkindly, but with the weight of a man who has spent decades weighing risk against risk and has learned never to accept an answer without first testing it. You understand what you are claiming, he says. You understand that if you are wrong, there is no one left above that sea to correct the mistake. Elena answers without flinching. I understand exactly what I am claiming, Chancellor. I have understood it since the moment I heard that door go silent. Silence, brief but heavy, on the other end of the crystal. Repeat that, Ashcombe says. I can fly it, she says again, steady and certain. I trained 6 years with the Duskwarden Order along the storm border. I hold a current pilot's mark. 3,200 hours aloft, all told. Give me entry to that chamber, Chancellor. I can bring the ship home safely. She hears faint voices in the background of the crystal. Other harbor stewards asking hurried questions of one another. Someone calling for the old training ledgers to be brought up from the archive cellar at once. There is a pause while, she imagines, some clerk or archivist searches the harbor's old records for her name. Papers rustling somewhere far below on solid ground while she stands suspended above a black and endless sea. Then Ashcombe's voice returns, changed, sharpened with new respect where there had only been cautious authority before. Elena Marsh. Former Duskwarden Sky Knight. Pilot's mark active and current. Not certified on a vessel of the Duskwings class specifically, but qualified in principle. And tonight the only qualified soul aboard this ship. Very well. I am naming you acting captain of this vessel under harbor emergency law. Stand by for the access ward. We are already sending word ahead to the coastal watchtower nearest your position. A moment later, his voice returns once more. I have the override ward ready. It requires 6 spoken words of binding, entered at the door ward panel. You will have 30 heartbeats to speak them before the ward resets itself and locks again. Are you ready? Ready, she says, and means it fully, more fully than she has meant anything in a very long time. He recites the words slowly, deliberately, and she repeats each one back to be certain nothing is lost between them. Then, without wasting another breath, she runs to the helm chamber door, finds the small ward panel hidden beneath its brass cover, and speaks the 6 words clearly into the listening glass set into its center. A soft chime answers her, then a heavy click as the ancient locks disengage one by one, each release sounding louder than the last in the silence of the corridor. The door that has never once opened without Alaric's own hand now swings open beneath hers. The scene inside is exactly the nightmare she feared it might be. Alaric Voss lies slumped half out of his great chair, his pale face gone the color of ash, his breath shallow and catching in a rhythm she recognizes immediately from her years along the border. She has seen enough battlefield collapses in that time to know his heart, ancient as it is failing him even now. She steps further in and finds the washroom door, opens it, and finds Mira crumpled on the floor, unconscious, breathing but unresponsive. the smell of spoiled wine still clinging heavy to the air around her. For one brief moment, she simply kneels there beside him, the proud king who dismissed her without a second glance, now utterly at her mercy. And she feels no satisfaction in it at all, only the plain, urgent need to keep him breathing long enough for someone with the right skills to take over from her. She calls down the corridor for Tomas, who arrives within moments with Dr. Cole close behind him, already roused by the commotion rippling through the cabins ahead of any formal announcement. "Help me move him," Elena says, and together they carry Alaric out of the chamber and lay him flat in the open floor of the forward cabin, where there is room enough to work properly. Dr. Cole kneels beside him immediately, checking pulse, breath, the responsiveness of his eyes with the calm efficiency of decades spent doing exactly this kind of work under far worse conditions than this. His heart is failing, the doctor confirms grimly, beginning the old restoring pressure at once. He positions his hands and begins the steady rhythm of chest compressions that every trained healer along the coast learns for exactly this dread possibility. While Tomas assists with careful counted breaths between each set, his own hands not quite steady but doing the work regardless. Because someone has to, and there is no one else nearby to do it, Elena returns briefly to the washroom, helping two other stewards carry Mira out to the galley floor, where they check her breathing, keep her turned gently on her side, and watch her carefully for any worsening of her condition. "Stable for now," one steward reports, breathing steady, unconscious but steady, and holding for the moment, which is the only mercy any of them can ask for right now. Word of the crisis has already begun to ripple quietly through the nearer cabins, passengers half rising from their seats, murmuring to one another, a few children beginning to cry at the sudden tension in the air, though they do not yet understand its cause. The elderly woman who has knitted so steadily through the whole crossing sets her needles carefully into her lap and watches the commotion with the calm, unhurried attention of someone who has weathered worse nights than this one somewhere in her long life. Dr. Cole does not once look up from his work as he counts the rhythm of the compressions aloud, steady and unbroken, his years of practice carrying him through the fear that any ordinary observer would feel watching an ancient king's heart falter beneath their own two hands. Tomas matches his rhythm without being asked, the two of them moving together, like men who have trained for exactly this moment their whole lives, though neither ever expected to spend it kneeling over a king on the floor of an airship cabin. Tomas moves quickly to the speaking horn near the galley to prepare the announcement that will soon steady the whole ship, while Elena, satisfied that both fallen pilots are in the best hands available aboard, turns back toward the helm chamber one final time. She steps inside, closes the heavy door behind her, and for one single heartbeat simply stands there, looking at the great carved chair she has not sat in anything like it for 5 long years. The chair she once believed, quietly and without much grief, that she would never sit in again. She slides into the seat, fastens the harnesses across her chest, and lets her hands settle against the brass controls. Larger than anything she flew along the border, heavier, slower to answer, but built on the same old principles of lift and current and will that she learned as a girl of 19 under Corwin Ash's patient, exacting instruction. She can do this. She reminds herself, once firmly, that she already has, 100 times over, in far worse skies than this one, on nights when the border itself seemed determined to swallow her whole. She checks the instruments one by one, the way Corwin taught her to, before anything else, before speed, before altitude, before even the compass heading. Altitude holding steady, heading true. Fuel reserves more than sufficient for the remaining distance. Weather ahead reported clear. The ship itself is healthy, indifferent to the crisis that nearly claimed it, and it only ever needed a steady hand back at the helm to carry it the rest of the way home safely. She notices, almost absently, the small brass plate fixed beneath the main console, engraved with the ship's christening date and the name of the shipwright who built her, a tradition every vessel of the harbor line carries somewhere within its helm chamber. She wonders briefly what that same shipwright would think, seeing who now sits in the great carved chair meant for a king, and decides, with the ghost of a smile she cannot quite suppress even now, that the ship itself has never once cared who flew it well, only that someone finally did. She lifts the long-range speaking crystal and opens the channel to the coastal watchtower. "This is the dusk wing," she says, voice level and clear despite everything pressing against her chest. "I am declaring a formal emergency. Both the captain and first mate are incapacitated. I am a trained pilot assuming command of this vessel." I require immediate guidance to the nearest safe harbor. A long pause follows on the other end, longer than she expects, long enough that she wonders briefly if the crystal itself has failed her. Nothing like this has happened in the memory of the harbor authority. A steward taking the helm of a king's own flagship in the middle of the deep crossing. But then the tower's voice returns, calm and steady despite the strangeness of it all. The voice of someone who has decided, in the space of a few heartbeats, simply to trust her completely. Duskwing, this is Blackreef Watch. Confirm both pilots incapacitated. Confirmed, she answers. I am pilot in command now. Guide me home. The voice from Blackreef Watch stays with her every step of the way, patient and precise, walking her through headings and altitudes as though she had flown this exact crossing 100 times before tonight. Turn to a new heading, she is told, and begin a slow descent from the high current toward the lower sky. She eases the great control yoke forward, feeling the ship respond beneath her hands, heavier than her old war cutter but honest in its own way, answering every correction with a steady, trustworthy weight that settles something in her chest she had not realized was still unsettled after all these quiet years. For a moment, guiding the great ship through the dark, she is 19 again, flying low along the storm border with Corwin's voice crackling steady in her ear through an older, cruder speaking tube, telling her exactly what she needs to hear in exactly the tone she needs to hear it. Trust your hands. He used to say, before you trust the dials. The ship will tell you what it needs if you are patient enough to listen. She listens now, and the Duskwing answers her, steady and true, the way a good ship always answers a pilot who respects it. She remembers, without quite meaning to, the worst night of her border service, a night far from any of this one, and yet strangely close to it in feeling, when a squadron of 3 war cutters was caught in an unexpected storm far past the reach of any friendly harbor. 2 pilots ahead of her lost their nerve in the turbulence and had to be talked down step by step over the speaking tube, while she held her own cutter steady and, in the end, guided both of the others safely through the worst of it, simply by keeping her voice calm when theirs began to shake. Corwin told her afterward that the calm itself had been the thing that saved them, more than any single maneuver she made with her hands. She holds that same calm now, deliberately, the way she has held it every single time fear has tried to climb up into her throat and take over. Blackreef Watch continues to guide her, unhurried and precise, and she matches their steadiness with her own, refusing to let the enormity of what she is doing, an unlicensed steward flying a king's flagship through the dark with 280 lives aboard, take root anywhere in her mind long enough to shake her hands. Behind her, in the forward cabin, Dr. Cole continues the old restoring rhythm over Alaric's chest, counting softly under his breath, pausing only to check the faint, irregular pulse fluttering at his throat before resuming without complaint. Tomas kneels close beside them both, steadying Mira where she lies nearby, watching her breath rise and fall with careful attention, ready to call out the moment anything changes for better or worse. Word passes quietly through the cabins that a steward has taken the helm. And though fear ripples through the passengers at first, Tomas's calm announcement and the steady hum of the engines holding their course keep that fear from tipping over into panic. Ladies and gentlemen, Tomas says over the ship's speaking horn, his voice deliberately even, we are experiencing a medical emergency among our flight crew. As a precaution, we are diverting toward Fenwick Cove, a smaller harbor along our route. There is no danger to the ship itself. We have a fully qualified pilot at the helm. We expect to land within the hour. Please remain calm and follow the instructions of your crew. The cabin quiets somewhat at his words, fear still present but no longer sharpening into panic, the way a held breath slowly eases when the worst uncertainty has finally been named aloud. Alina feels the weight of every one of those 280 lives pressing gently against her shoulders, not as a burden that shakes her hands, but as something that steadies them instead. This is what her 6 years along the border trained into her bones, that fear is simply information, and the only thing that truly matters is the next correct motion of the hands upon the controls in front of her. Nothing more and nothing less than that. Back in the cabin, the young girl from the middle rows asks her father in a small voice whether the ship is going to fall. He tells her no, that a very brave woman is flying them home now, and the girl seems to accept this the same way she accepted Elena's earlier answer about the stars. Simply and completely, the way children often trust more easily than the adults around them manage to. Word of that small exchange passes quietly down the rows, softening the fear in the cabin just slightly further. One whispered reassurance at a time, she banks the ship gently onto the new heading. watches the compass needle settle true and eases her breathing into the same slow rhythm she once used gliding low over the storm border at midnight, when every mistake carried consequences far sharper than embarrassment. Black Reef Watch guides her lower still, through a thin band of cloud that shudders the ship briefly before releasing it into calmer air beyond, and she corrects for the small jolt with barely a flicker of hesitation, her hands remembering the motion before her mind has even finished deciding on it. Steady as she comes, the tower voice tells her, and steady she holds it, correcting for a stray gust with the barest touch of the yoke, exactly as she was trained to do a lifetime ago beneath a much harsher sky. Far below at last, a scatter of harbor lights breaks the endless black, a small coastal town called Fenwick Cove, its landing tower lit bright and waiting, growing steadily larger as the ship descends toward it through the dark, closer now with every passing minute. Fenwick Cove Tower takes over the channel from Black Reef Watch, guiding her the last distance in with calm, careful instructions. Reduce your speed gradually, the voice tells her. Lower your landing gear. Hold your heading true on the beacon light burning at the center of the runway. She follows every instruction precisely, feeling the ship settle into its final approach the way a bird settles onto a familiar branch after a long day aloft, and ahead of her the landing tower grows from a distant glow into a full, blazing constellation of lanterns and waiting healers' wagons already gathering at the edge of the field. Her hands do not shake, though she is distantly aware they might have every right to. She thinks, briefly, of Corwin, of the calm voice he always kept even in the worst of the border storms, and she borrows that same calm now, holding it around herself like a second harness. The runway lights swim closer, closer still, until the whole width of them fills the front of the helm, great glass window, bright enough now to sting faintly at the edges of her vision after so long spent flying through darkness. The tower voice walks her through the final checks one at a time, patient as a teacher with a favored student, confirming her flap settings, her approach angle, the steady state of her engines. Each answer she gives back met with the same even, encouraging tone. You are doing everything right, the voice tells her once, quietly, almost gently, and something in her chest loosened slightly at hearing it. Some small tension she had not realized she was still carrying since the moment she first stepped through that sealed door. Below her, the shape of Fenwick Cove resolves out of the darkness, a modest harbor town built along a curved inlet, its rooftops silvered faintly by the first thin edge of moonlight breaking through the clouds. She can see the landing field clearly now, a long pale stretch bordered by lanterns on both sides, and beyond it the dark shapes of healers' wagons already arranged in a loose semicircle, waiting for whatever the ship might bring down with it. She reduces power steadily, watching her speed bleed away exactly as it should, the landing gear locking into place with 3 solid, reassuring clicks she feels through the whole frame of the ship beneath her. 500 feet, 200, 100. She pulls back gently on the yoke as the ground rises to meet her, easing the great vessel down with a gentleness that surprises even her, the landing skids kissing the stone runway with barely a shudder through the hull. She reverses the engines, feels the ship shudder once and begin to slow, and holds the course true down the center of the landing way until at last, with a final long breath released from every strained timber in her, the Duskwing rolls to a full and complete stop, exactly where it was always meant to come to rest at the end of this long and terrible night. Silence holds the cabin for one heartbeat, and then it breaks entirely into weeping and laughter and disbelieving applause. 280 passengers alive who fully understand, in that instant, exactly how close they came to a very different ending than the one they have just been given. Healers rush the ship the moment its doors open, lifting Alaric onto a stretcher first, still breathing, still faintly alive thanks to Dr. Cole's tireless hands, and rushing him toward the healing hall at the edge of the landing field without a moment to spare. Mira follows soon after, still unconscious but stable, her color already beginning to return to something closer to natural. Ground crews swarm the field the moment the engines fall silent, securing the great ship with practiced speed, while a second wave of healers moves through the cabin itself, checking passengers one by one for any lingering shock or injury from the long, frightening hour they have just endured. A young healer kneels briefly beside the small girl from the middle cabin, who insists cheerfully that she is not scared at all now, only hungry, and the healer laughs despite everything, relieved to find at least one passenger, entirely unshaken by the night's events. The master of Fenwick Cove himself arrives at the edge of the field within minutes, having been roused from his own quiet evening by the sudden arrival of a king's flagship diverting unannounced into his small coastal jurisdiction. He finds Elena still standing near the base of the boarding ramp, and though he clearly does not yet know quite what to make of her, he extends his hand regardless and thanks her plainly for whatever she has just done, sensing, even without the full account yet in hand, that it was something far beyond the ordinary. Passengers begin filing down the ramp in small clusters, many of them pausing beside Elena on their way past, some simply nodding their gratitude, others stopping long enough to press her hand or murmur a few words she will remember for a long while afterward. The young sailor from the lower berths, bound home to his family after a year away, tells her quietly that he has a small daughter waiting for him at the far harbor, and that he will be telling her someday about the night a steward became a captain high above the sea. The young girl from the middle cabin clutches her father's hand tightly as the healers pass, watching wide-eyed, and the elderly woman who knitted so calmly through the whole crossing finally sets her needles down at last, murmuring a quiet prayer of thanks under her breath. The merchants who had argued over their ledger sit in stunned silence, the argument forgotten entirely, dwarfed by everything that has just happened around them in the space of one dark hour. Elena remains in the helm chamber a moment longer, running through the full shutdown ritual out of long habit, every dial and lever set correctly in its place, before she finally rises, unfastens her harness, and steps out into the corridor on legs that only now, with the danger truly past, allow themselves to tremble slightly. When she walks into the cabin, the passengers rise together in a single unplanned motion, applauding, reaching toward her, some simply weeping with relief they can no longer hold back after so long holding it in check. The young girl from the middle cabin waves at her through the crowd, and Elena finds herself smiling despite everything. A small, tired, genuine smile that reaches all the way to her eyes for the first time in hours. She only says quietly that she was doing her duty as crew, though every soul aboard knows by now that it was far more than that, and no amount of modesty on her part is going to change what they watched her do in the space of a single desperate hour above a black and merciless sea. Outside on the landing field, healers work quickly over Alaric, stabilizing him enough for the short journey to the healing hall, while Dr. Cole walks alongside the stretcher, relaying everything he observed during the crossing to the healers, now taking over his care. Tomas stands near the ship's open door, watching it all with the stunned, grateful look of a man who has just lived through something he will be telling his grandchildren about decades from now, still hardly able to believe any of it actually happened the way it did. Myra wakes briefly as her own stretcher is carried down the ramp, blinking against the lantern light, and asks weakly what happened. A healer tells her gently that she is safe, that the ship landed safely, that a steward flew them home. Mira closes her eyes again, too exhausted to ask anything further, though something like relief passes faintly across her pale face before she drifts back under. Elena watches both stretchers disappear into the healing hall's tall doors, and only then does she allow herself to lean briefly against the cold hull of the ship, drawing one long, unsteady breath at last, the first she has permitted herself since the moment the speaking tube first went silent behind that sealed door. The danger is over, the passengers are safe, and for the first time in 5 long years, she has flown, truly flown, exactly as she was always meant to. 3 weeks pass before Alaric Voss opens his eyes fully steady again, in a healing hall built of pale stone and old ivy, sunlight, or what little of it he allows through the shuttered windows, falling softly across the blankets covering him. The court healers have confirmed what he refused to hear for months, a slow failing of the heart brought on by centuries of refusing rest, refusing aid, refusing to ever appear less than untouchable before his own crew and his own people. He very nearly died, proving a point that helped absolutely no one at all, least of all himself. The Council of Elders reviews the full account of the crossing, and their judgment is plain and unflinching. Alaric concealed a failing condition from his own crew and nearly cost 280 lives for the sake of his pride alone. He listens to every word without argument, because for the first time in 2 centuries, he knows without any doubt that they are entirely right, and arguing would only prove how little he had actually learned from the whole ordeal that nearly ended everything. The eldest of the council, a stern woman named Lady Priska, who remembers Alaric's own coronation and the anxious young king he was before he learned to hide it so completely, speaks last and longest. She reminds him, not unkindly, that she warned his ministers decades ago that a crown built entirely on the fear of appearing weak would eventually collapse under its own weight. one way or another. She tells him plainly that he is fortunate it collapsed only partway, and that a woman he never once thought to truly look at was standing close enough to catch what fell. Alaric asks, quietly, what will be required of him now. Rest, Lady Priska tells him, real rest, not the performance of it. Proper feeding, on a proper schedule, without the shame he has attached to it for 2 centuries. And an apology, she adds, though not to this council. The apology that matters is owed to a steward who deserved better than the door you locked against her, and to every soul aboard that ship who trusted you with their lives, without ever being told the truth of your condition. But the council also notes, with something almost like wonder in their old voices, that he is alive at all only because a steward he dismissed at the gangway, without a second glance, turned out to be the very thing that saved him. He will never fluskwing again in the way he once did, they tell him gently but firmly, not until his heart has healed as far as it is able, and perhaps not ever again entirely alone, unwatched, answerable to no one but himself, as he always insisted on being before. In a smaller chamber down the same corridor, Elena Marsh sits across from the harbor authorities' own council, who have come with an offer rather than a judgment. She may remain a steward with new honor and higher wage, they tell her, or she may return fully to the sky as a certified captain in her own right, her old pilot's mark restored to full standing without question or delay. She does not hesitate over the choice for even a moment. I want to fly, she tells them plainly. That is who I have always been, even when I set it aside for a while to care for the people I loved. When Alaric is well enough to walk the healing hall's garden path unassisted, leaning only lightly on a healer's arm, he asks, quietly and without any of his old sharpness, whether Elena might visit him there. She comes, dressed simply, without her steward's uniform for the first time since he has known her, and for a long while neither of them says very much at all, only sit together beneath the pale trees while he turns his signet ring slowly around his finger, a habit she has come to recognize as the closest thing he has to nervousness. I owe you my life, he finally says, and I spent 2 centuries believing I owed no one anything at all. She only tells him that pride is a heavy thing to carry alone, heavier than any ship, heavier certainly than a crown, and that even kings are allowed to set it down once in a while without the whole world collapsing around them. He is quiet for a long moment after that, watching the wind move through the ivy, before admitting, almost too softly for her to catch, that he had noticed her that first evening at the gangway, more than he ever let himself show at the time. He asks her, eventually, why she never once told anyone aboard the Duskwing about her years along the border, why she let an entire crew believe she was nothing more than a steward with a talent for calming nervous travelers. She considers the question honestly before answering. It was easier, she tells him, to let people decide for themselves what she was worth based on what they saw in front of them, rather than spend her energy correcting them. And besides, she adds, a small wry note entering her voice, no one ever asked, not once, in 5 long years, not even you. He accepts the small rebuke without flinching, because he has earned sharper ones than that from far less patient people over the past 3 weeks. I am asking now, he says simply. Tell me who you were before you poured wine for kings who never learned your name. And so she does, slowly, unhurried, describing the storm border and the war cutters, and Corwin's patient voice in her ear, and he listens to every word as though it were the only story worth hearing in 2 centuries of listening. Their conversations continue through the following weeks, first in the garden, then over quiet cups of tea in the healing hall's long windowed corridor, then eventually in letters when her own duties call her briefly back toward the sky once more. He tells her, in time, about Corwin's old lessons without her ever having mentioned them first, having asked the harbor archives quietly for whatever record they kept of her training, and she finds she does not mind at all that he went looking for it. She tells him, in turn, about her mother, about the quiet ordinary years she thought had closed the door on flying for good, and he listens the way no one has listened to her in a very long while, without once trying to fix or hurry what she is telling him. He tells her, too, about the cousin who collapsed before the court all those decades ago, about the fear that memory planted in him so deep he built his entire reign around never repeating it, and she tells him, gently, that fear built on top of another person's misfortune rarely protects anyone at all, that it simply waits quietly for its own turn to come due. He does not argue with her. He has learned slowly and at great cost that arguing with the truth has never once made it any less true. Myra visits him, too, once she has fully recovered from the spoiled wine that nearly cost her own life alongside his, and their conversation is shorter, but no less honest. She tells him she is not angry, only frightened by how close they both came to a very different ending, and she asks, carefully, whether he intends to keep flying the Duskwing himself once he is well again. He tells her the truth, that he does not yet know, that for the first time in 2 centuries, the answer is not already decided before the question is even finished being asked. Dr. Cole receives a formal letter of gratitude from the council some weeks later, along with a standing invitation to serve as the Duskwing's official healer on all future crossings, an offer he accepts gladly, glad to have found, quite by accident, one more use for the steady hands that spent decades preparing for exactly this sort of night, without ever expecting to need them above open water. Half a year later, Elena Marsh sits at the helm of her own vessel, a smaller ship of the harbor line, with a young first mate beside her who she treats as an equal rather than a subordinate, exactly as she always believed a helm chamber should be run from the very first day she took her own captain's mark. Alaric Voss visits Fenwick Cove often now, not as a distant king descending to inspect his holdings, but simply as a man who has learned, late in a very long life, that strength shared is no weaker than strength hoarded alone, and is very often a great deal stronger than anything pride alone could ever build. They do not rush what has grown quietly between them, both of them too old in their own ways, in years or in grief, to mistake haste for certainty. But there is an ease in the way he now looks at her across a room, unguarded in a manner none of his court ever once witnessed before that night above the sea, and an ease in the way she no longer files away his small tired signs as things to worry over alone. Because he tells her himself now, plainly, when something in him is beginning to falter, trusting her with the truth long before any crisis forces it out of him. On a quiet evening in early autumn, walking the same stretch of harbor path where he first watched her greet passengers without truly seeing her, Alaric finally asks whether she might consider flying the Duskwing again herself, not as a steward pressed into emergency service, but as his named co-captain, sharing the helm chamber he once swore no one would ever enter beside him. She studies him for a long moment before answering, searching his face for the old pride that once refused any partner at all, and finds, to her quiet relief, that is simply not there anymore. I would want it run properly, she tells him, both of us watching the instruments, both of us speaking honestly when something feels wrong, no locked doors between us of any kind. He agrees without hesitation, and means it, and the agreement settles something between them that no formal courtship ever could have, a shared understanding built not on romance alone but on the plain, hard-won respect of 2 people who have already trusted each other with the truth, in the worst hour either of them has ever lived through. Thomas, when he hears the news, only laughs and reminds her that he told her, once, long ago in a quiet galley, that she could fly circles around the captain if she ever chose to. She reminds him, in turn, that she never actually needed his permission to know it, only the occasion to prove it, and he concedes the point with good humor, glad simply to have been there to see it happen. Alina's mother, when she finally hears the whole story from her daughter's own mouth, rather than the garbled versions already circulating through the harbor markets, only shakes her head slowly and says she always wondered why her daughter kept renewing that old pilot's mark year after year, long after anyone would have blamed her for letting it lapse quietly. Elena tells her simply that some part of her never quite believed the sky was finished with her, even during the long years she spent convincing herself otherwise. The council formally records the crossing in the harbor line's old ledgers, the first and only entry of its kind, a steward assuming emergency command of a king's own vessel and bringing it home without the loss of a single soul aboard. Future stewards training at Wintermere Harbor are told the story now as part of their earliest lessons, not as legend exactly, but as plain fact, proof that the uniform a person wears on any given crossing rarely tells the whole truth of what they are capable of carrying. And there is a truth in all of this worth carrying with you long after the story ends, a truth that has nothing to do with airships or ancient kings at all. It is the plain, quiet lesson. The titles and uniforms tell us almost nothing true about the people wearing them. The proudest man in the room is often the one most afraid to admit he is breaking, and the fear that drives him rarely has anything to do with the thing he claims to fear at all. The quietest person at the edge of the gathering, the one pouring the wine or sweeping the floor, or simply standing patiently at the door, may be carrying a whole lifetime of strength that no one ever thought to ask about, because no one ever thought to look closely enough to ask. We spend so much of our lives sorting people into their visible roles, captain and crew, master and servant, the one who leads and the one who merely serves, And we forget how often life rearranges those roles in a single unexpected hour, without asking anyone's permission first. The people we overlook because their job seems small are rarely small themselves, and the years they have spent unnoticed are very often the years that shaped whatever quiet strength they are carrying, patiently, for a moment they never fully expected would come. And the people we admire most for their confidence are very often the ones most terrified to let anyone see them falter, so terrified that they would rather risk everything, even the lives of those around them, than admit they need a steady hand beside their own. There is no shame in being the one who needs help, and there is no shame either in being the one whose gifts have gone quietly unnoticed for years while you waited for the moment they might matter again. The measure of a person was never the uniform they wore or the chair they were allowed to sit in, and it was certainly never the number of years since anyone last asked what they were truly capable of. It was always what they were willing to do the moment it truly mattered, when no one else was left standing to do it, and when every excuse to stay quiet would have been so easy to reach for instead of stepping forward. Pride convinces us that admitting weakness will cost us everything we have built, that the crown, the title, the years of careful reputation will all crumble the moment we let someone see us falter. In truth, it is far more often the silence around our weakness that costs us everything in the end, while the honest admission of it is what finally lets someone else reach in and save us, sometimes in ways we never could have predicted or asked for directly, and sometimes through people we had long since stopped truly seeing at all. So look closely, always, at the ones beside you who go quietly about their small, steady work, the ones you may have stopped truly noticing a long time ago, and never assume you have already seen the whole of what they carry inside them. And when your own strength begins to falter, as it will for every one of us eventually, in one way or another, remember that setting your pride down is not the same as losing. Sometimes it is simply the only way anyone ever comes home safely at all. And sometimes it is the very thing that finally lets two people, who might never otherwise have looked twice at each other, find their way towards something neither of them ever expected to find again.